All right, let's do this. Today we're diving deep, way deep into the heart of NASA's Apollo program.
Okay.
But we're not just talking moon landings and giant leaps, you know?
Right.
We're digging into the nitty-gritty, the behind-the-scenes secrets that made it all possible.
Yeah. The stuff you don't always hear about.
Exactly. And our source for all this juicy insider knowledge.
A NASA publication, actually, called What Made Apollo a Success? Straight from the engineers and mission planners themselves.
So buckle up, because we're about to unearth some real gems about how they pulled off this, well, this impossible feat.
I think one of the things that might surprise people is that, well, one of the key ingredients was actually simplicity.
Simplicity. Wait, hold on. How do you keep things simple when you're building, a spacecraft to go to the moon? That seems a little counterintuitive.
It's all about discipline, really.
Yeah.
The Apollo engineers were laser-focused on minimizing interfaces between complex hardware.
Okay, I'm listening.
So, for example, the connection between the entire Apollo spacecraft and that massive Saturn V rocket, achieved with just 100 wires.
Wait, just 100 wires.
100 wires. That's it.
That's less than my home entertainment system.
Exactly. And that tells you a lot about their philosophy. Keep it simple, reduce the risk of failure. Actually, it's a pretty good lesson for life in general, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Less is more, right? But how does that actually work in practice?
Well, it meant that a single person could actually wrap their head around that critical link between the spacecraft and the rocket. It simplified things tremendously, reducing the chances of errors.
Okay, so that makes sense for physical connections. But what about the whole human versus machine thing? How did they decide what the astronauts should control and what should be automated?
That was another area where they found that balance, deciding which tasks were best suited for, human judgment and skill, and which could be safely handed over to automatic systems. And actually that balance shifted over time as their confidence in automation grew.
Interesting. Speaking of confidence, their approach to in-flight maintenance was, well, let's just say unique.
Yeah, unique is one way to put it. Basically, they decided to forego in-flight repairs altogether.
They just said no to repairs in space. Bold move.
Very bold.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, packing tools and spare parts, they doubled down on telemetry.
Mm-hmm.
That constant stream of data being sent back to ground control.
Right.
So you think of it like having a whole team of expert mechanics constantly monitoring your car's engine while you drive.
Yeah.
Ready to, offer advice if anything goes wrong.
Okay, that's actually a really good analogy. But how did they make sure all those systems were actually reliable enough to trust?
Testing, and more testing. And we're not just talking about testing individual parts here. They tested complete spacecraft.
Oh, wow. Okay, give me some examples.
Oh, we're talking escape motor flight tests, parachute drop tests, even full-on crash tests of the command module, to make sure it could withstand a rough landing if necessary.
I bet that was intense to watch.
Oh, absolutely. And then you've got the environmental testing, which was just as rigorous.
Oh, right. I've heard about that. Didn't they, vibrate and basically bake components to find any hidden flaws?
Exactly. They were intentionally trying to break things to make sure they wouldn't break during an actual mission.
Smart, but kind of crazy, right?
Well, it paid off. Because you know what? Their testing actually revealed some surprisingly high failure rates, like 5% failure for vibration testing and over 10% for thermal. Imagine if those flaws had gone unnoticed.
Yeah, that would have been not good. So it seems like they were really aware of, that even the smallest changes could have huge ripple effects on the entire system.
Yeah, and that awareness led to an incredibly strict change control process. Like every proposed modification, no matter how tiny, had to go through this rigorous review by the Configuration Control Board.
Okay, how rigorous are we talking here?
Well, get this. This board met 90 times before Apollo 11, and they evaluated almost 1,700 changes, rejecting 356 of them.
Wow, 90 meetings. That's dedication. So I guess they really understood that with a system as complex as Apollo, change can be a dangerous thing. But with all that planning and testing, I'm sure things didn't always go perfectly right.
Well, you're right. Spaceflight, no matter how much you prepare, is inherently risky. And Apollo was no exception. They did have their share of anomalies and discrepancies.
So how did they deal with that?
They learned from them.
Yeah.
Every single one. It was all about meticulous documentation and analysis, even for the smallest hiccups. They wanted to understand the cause, prevent it from happening again.
So it wasn't just about fixing the problem. It was about turning every failure into a learning opportunity.
Precisely.
Okay, so do you have an example of a a time when they did that turned a failure into a valuable lesson?
Absolutely. So there's this fascinating case from Apollo 10. They were in lunar orbit, and suddenly the temperature in a critical fuel cell started oscillating.
Oh, sounds like trouble.
It was a close call, for
Mhm.
sure. Alarms went off, but thankfully it didn't cause a major problem during that mission.
So a bit of a scare, but everything turned out okay. But I'm guessing they didn't just, breathe a sigh of relief and move on.
Definitely not. They dug deep, extensive analysis, testing.
Mm.
They wanted to know why. And they discovered a potential instability in the fuel cell system.
So it was a near miss, but it could have been much worse on future missions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But because they took the time to really understand what happened, they were able to implement a fix.
Okay, so turning a near disaster into a valuable lesson. I like that. It seems like that whole approach of constant learning and improvement was, it was kind of baked into the DNA of the entire program.
Yeah, definitely. And that brings us to the way they structure the Apollo missions themselves. Because it wasn't just a random series of flights.
Right, each mission built on the one before it, right.
Exactly. Think of it as a carefully crafted staircase, each step leading them closer to that ultimate goal, landing on the moon.
Okay, I like that analogy. So talk me through that staircase. How did each mission get them closer to that ultimate goal?
Well, they started with unmanned flights, to test those critical systems like the launch escape system and the command module's heat shield.
Makes sense. Get the basics right first.
Exactly. And then came Apollo 5, which focused specifically on testing the lunar module.
Okay, so making sure the lander actually worked before putting people in it.
Right. And only after they proved those systems did they move on to manned missions.
So Apollo 7 was the first time astronauts actually flew the command and service module.
Yep. And they orbited Earth for 11 days, just putting everything through its paces.
Okay, so what came next? What was the next step on that staircase?
Well, here's where you see their flexibility. The initial plan was to do a series of, Earth orbit missions to gradually test the lunar module and those crucial rendezvous procedures. But, after the success of Apollo 7 and considering some delays in lunar module development, they made a bold decision.
They changed the plan.
Even bolder. They decided to send Apollo 8 with astronauts on board all the way to the moon.
Whoa, skipping ahead a few steps there.
They skipped several planned Earth orbit missions. It was risky, but it also showed their confidence in the command and service module and, their willingness to adapt.
I love that. So Apollo 8 orbited the moon, setting the stage for those future landing missions.
Precisely. And then came Apollo 9. That's when they finally got to test the lunar module and those rendezvous procedures, but this time in Earth orbit.
So basically a dress rehearsal for the lunar landing, but in a safer, more controlled environment.
Exactly. And then Apollo 10 took everything a step further. They went back to the moon, and they actually did a mock landing, descending to within just a few miles of the surface before returning to orbit.
Wow, a full dress rehearsal right down to the wire.
You got it. It was the ultimate test, making sure everything was ready for Apollo 11.
Okay, it's mind-blowing how methodical they were. Each step so deliberate, minimizing risk, learning from each experience. Incredible. But it wasn't just about testing the hardware, was it? They were also refining the way they actually operated during the missions.
Right. They called them mission techniques.
Mission techniques. Okay, so like how to make decisions, prioritize data, that sort of thing.
Exactly. They were constantly tweaking their approach, learning from each mission to make sure they were prepared for anything.
All right, so let's talk about the level of detail that went into planning these missions.
Oh, it was intense. They had to pack each flight with as many tests and operational objectives as possible while considering every potential point of failure, right?
Yeah.
It was constant what-if scenarios.
Okay, so not just reacting to failures, but trying to anticipate them, planning for the unexpected, even when everything seemed to be working perfectly.
Exactly. It wasn't just about reacting. It was about testing for normal situations, too. Always looking for ways to optimize and push the limits.
So did they have like a specific process or system for dealing with these contingencies?
Yet they developed what they called mission techniques, basically detailed instructions on how the team should prioritize data, make decisions, and respond to unexpected events.
So like a giant flowchart guiding their actions for every imaginable situation. It's exactly a playbook for navigating the complexities of a lunar mission.
Amazing. But what about the astronauts? Those guys were more than just pilots. They had to operate these incredibly complex spacecraft. How did they prepare for that?
The astronaut training was just as rigorous as the engineering, trust me.
Okay, give me the rundown. What kind of crazy stuff did they do to get ready?
Well, for starters, they flew high-performance airplanes to hone their piloting skills, practice responding to emergencies.
Obsessed. But that's just the beginning, right?
Oh, yeah. They spent countless hours in dynamic simulators, experiencing the forces of launch, learning to take manual control if the automatic systems failed. Have you ever seen pictures of those simulators?
Oh, yeah. They look insane, like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
They were incredibly sophisticated,
Yeah.
like exact replicas of the spacecraft, same controls, displays. They could actually practice procedures and experience the sights and sounds of spaceflight.
Wow. That's incredible. But how'd they train for, walking on the moon? That's a whole different ball game, right?
Okay.
Oh, for that, they used some really ingenious techniques. For example, they practiced underwater in giant pools to simulate the reduced gravity of the lunar surface.
I've always wondered how they did that. It makes perfect sense using water. What else?
They also used a special aircraft that flew in parabolic arcs, created these short periods of weightlessness to practice moving around in those bulky lunar spacesuits.
Okay, that's cool.
And, get this, they even had this contraption called a flying bedstead. It was basically a jet engine that could counter Earth's gravity so they could actually, experience a lunar-like environment.
A flying bedstead. Now I've got to see pictures of that.
It sounds crazy, but it worked. They really threw everything they had at astronaut training, making sure those guys were ready for just about anything. But even with all that preparation, there was this one crucial challenge they had to overcome. Communication. They were going to the moon, way beyond Earth's communication networks. So what happened if something went wrong when they were in radio silence?
Yeah, good point. They couldn't just rely on mission control to talk them through every step like they did during Earth orbit.
Exactly. They had to train the astronauts to be more independent, develop procedures, taught them how to use the onboard navigation systems, even how to make calculations manually if communication with Earth was lost. It was all about redundancy and backup systems.
So if they had to, they could handle things on their own.
Absolutely. It was essential for both mission success and, astronaut safety.
Wow, we've already covered so much. The design, the testing, the planning, the astronaut training. And it's becoming clear that Apollo's success wasn't just about, one brilliant idea.
Right. It was about all these different factors working together in perfect harmony.
Exactly. And we haven't even touched on the incredible work done by the mission control team. Those folks on the ground monitoring the spacecraft, making real-time decisions, guiding those astronauts every step of the way.
They were the unsung heroes of Apollo, for sure.
Absolutely. And that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive. We'll be back soon to delve into the world of mission control, all the fascinating details of how they contributed to this incredible achievement. So stay tuned for that.
So, yeah, picking up where we left off, let's shine a light on, those often unsung heroes of Apollo, the mission control team.
Okay, I'm ready. Tell me about these masterminds. Paint a picture. What was mission control like, really?
Imagine this, okay? A room buzzing with energy, rows and rows of consoles, each one staffed by a specialist, meticulously monitoring every single aspect of the mission.
Sounds intense.
It was. You had flight controllers for everything: electrical systems, environmental controls, communication, guidance, navigation, propulsion, you name it, they had someone watching over it.
Like a symphony orchestra, almost. Each musician playing their part perfectly. But who was the conductor? Who brought it all together?
That would be the flight director. Their job: lead and coordinate the entire mission control team, making split-second decisions, based on input from all those specialists. Yeah. Ultimately, the safety and success of the mission rested on their shoulders.
Wow. That sounds incredibly demanding. All that data, the pressure, making decisions in real time.
You're telling me it was high pressure, demanding exceptional leadership, technical expertise, and, a cool head under pressure. But it wasn't just about reacting to situations as they popped up.
Right. They were also planning ahead, anticipating problems.
Exactly. Countless hours spent preparing for every conceivable scenario, developing procedures, rehearsing responses. They had to be ready for anything.
Okay, so do you have any examples of how their quick thinking and expertise, saved the day? Any close calls that come to mind?
Absolutely. Remember the lightning strike that almost crippled Apollo 12, just seconds after liftoff?
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that one.
Well, it was the mission control team that saved the mission, specifically the electrical systems engineer.
He's the one who saw the problem in the data, right?
Yep. Stayed calm, instructed the astronauts to reset the fuel cells, and boom, brought the spacecraft back to life.
What a save. Talk about thinking on your feet.
Right. It shows how crucial mission control was. They weren't just, sitting there watching. They were active participants, using their knowledge and experience to guide the astronauts, solve problems in real time.
It makes you wonder, how did they train for a job like that? I bet it was pretty intense.
You bet it was. Their training regimen was just as rigorous as the astronauts, maybe even more so, given the scope of their responsibilities.
Walk me through it. What did their training involve?
Well, they started with a deep dive into the spacecraft systems. I mean, they had to know those systems inside and out, down to the last detail, so they could diagnose problems and, come up with solutions.
So like memorizing tons of diagrams and manuals, right? Like studying for the ultimate spacecraft exam.
Exactly. They also had to master orbital mechanics and, understand all the complexities of navigating in space.
That sounds like a lot.
It was a lot. And then, of course, they would practice procedures, work through contingency plans, experience the pressure of real-time decision-making.
And all of this in simulators, I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah, sophisticated simulators.
So they threw everything they had at them.
Everything. Regular classes on specific systems, programmed instruction courses to reinforce their knowledge, even cockpit trainers to understand what the astronauts were dealing with. It was comprehensive.
Okay, so they were training as individuals.
Yeah.
But they also needed to work as a team, right?
Absolutely. They had to communicate effectively, coordinate their actions, especially during those critical, high-pressure moments.
It's like those movie scenes, where everyone comes together to solve a problem. But this was real life, and the stakes were, well, a lot higher than in a movie.
No kidding. And that's where the mission planning process comes in.
Okay, so tell me about that.
They didn't just sit around waiting for problems to arise. They were proactive. Actively anticipated challenges, developed procedures for, every possible scenario.
Always playing what if, huh?
Always. They'd identify those potential failure points, assess the impact, and develop those contingency plans.
Okay, so a plan for every possibility. That must have been some serious documentation.
Oh, yeah. Meticulous documentation. And those plans included, clear decision-making logic and thresholds for action.
So like a giant choose-your-own-adventure book for spaceflight, a plan for every possible twist and turn.
Exactly. And those, what they called mission rules, they weren't just dreamt up by one person,
Right.
They were collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
Input from engineers, flight controllers, even the astronauts themselves. It was constant refinement, incorporating lessons learned, adapting to each new flight.
I like that. The balance, being meticulous but also flexible.
It was key. Because, let's face it, spaceflight is unpredictable. You can plan all you want, but there will always be surprises.
So even with this amazing system they had in place to anticipate problems, did they still encounter surprises during the missions?
Of course. That's the nature of exploration, right? You're pushing the boundaries, so things are bound to go wrong, even with the best planning and preparation.
Do you have an example? A time when something unexpected happened and they had to think on their feet?
Sure. One that comes to mind is from Apollo 11's descent to the lunar surface. So as the lunar module was getting close to the landing site, alarms started going off in the computer.
Uh-oh. Not good.
Yeah, it's tense. The lunar module, just minutes from landing, and these alarms are blaring, indicating an overload in the computer. And the cause. Nobody knew right away.
So the pressure's on. What did they do?
They stayed calm, assessed the situation, and quickly determined that the alarms, they weren't actually indicating a critical problem.
Wow, how did they figure that out so fast?
Data analysis, expert consultation, and a whole lot of experience. They made the call to advise the astronauts to continue the descent, even with those alarms still going off.
That's a gutsy call. Imagine the responsibility weighing on them.
I know, it was huge. But thankfully, their assessment was correct. The alarms were annoying, sure, but they weren't going to stop the mission. The lunar module landed safely, and, the rest is history.
It really shows how their preparation, expertise, and ability to stay calm, ultimately saved the day.
Absolutely. And it highlights how Apollo's success wasn't just about avoiding failure. It was about being prepared to handle it when it happened, because it was going to happen.
Okay, so we've talked about the rigorous training, the planning, the unexpected challenges. The mission control team, they clearly played a vital role. But can we go a bit deeper into how they actually interacted with the astronauts during a mission? What was that communication like?
Well, it was like a carefully choreographed dance. A constant flow of information, instructions, updates, all meticulously orchestrated to make sure everyone was in sync, could respond to anything.
It sounds like a very delicate balance. Trust on both sides.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they had to be super precise with their language. Specific terminology, call signs, no room for misunderstandings.
Because even a small miscommunication at the wrong time could be disastrous.
You got it. Especially during those critical phases like launch, landing, rendezvous. Their communication had to be crystal clear, concise, unambiguous.
So voice communication was key, but they were also monitoring, like, tons of data from the spacecraft, right?
Oh, yeah. Real-time displays showing engine performance, oxygen levels, even the astronauts' heart rates.
Wow. They really were seeing everything.
They needed that complete picture to understand how the spacecraft was doing, how the crew was doing. It allowed them to react quickly.
I like that. They weren't just talking to the astronauts, they were experiencing the mission right alongside them, just, from Earth.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They were virtually in the spacecraft, monitoring every little thing, providing guidance.
So I have to ask, what was the atmosphere like in mission control during those really critical moments? Was it just like pure tension, or were they somehow able to stay calm?
It was definitely high pressure. I mean, lives were on the line, the whole world was watching.
I can only imagine.
But despite the pressure, they maintained this incredible discipline. They stuck to their training, their procedures, and most importantly, their teamwork.
So they stayed calm amidst the chaos. That's impressive.
It really speaks to their dedication, their training, and their understanding of the importance of, keeping a level head, even when stakes were so high. They were the epitome of grace under pressure, as they say.
Okay, so we've talked about the training, the planning, the challenges they faced, the incredible ability to stay calm when things got hairy. The mission control team, they were a vital part of Apollo's success. But it's also clear that their ability to learn, to constantly improve, that played a huge role too.
Yeah, Apollo's success wasn't just about avoiding mistakes. It was about being open to learning from them and constantly getting better.
Exactly. It wasn't just about the technology. It was also about the people, the processes, the culture they created.
And there's one more piece to that puzzle, something that might surprise you. Their approach to managing information, knowledge.
That's interesting. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. A program as big as Apollo must have generated a massive amount of information.
Well, yeah, mountains of data. And figuring out how to handle all of that, how to make it useful, that was another key to their success. It's actually a fascinating story.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So we'll have to explore that in part 3 of our deep dive. Stay tuned, because there's a lot more to uncover. Welcome back to our deep dive. We've covered a ton of ground already. The engineering, the testing, the incredible people involved. But there's this other element that we haven't really talked about, and it's maybe not the first thing you think about when you imagine sending people to the moon.
Right. It's the information, the knowledge, how they managed all of that.
Okay, so we're talking about more than just, blueprints and technical specs.
Oh, absolutely. It was way more than that. Test results, failure analysis reports, mission timelines, procedures, real-time telemetry data. It all had to be organized, accessible, and flowing smoothly between everyone involved. Engineers, designers, mission planners, flight controllers, the astronauts themselves. I mean, any hiccup in that flow of information could have meant, delays, mistakes, maybe even catastrophic failures.
So it was like drinking from a fire hose of information. How did they keep from drowning in it all?
They built systems, processes. They were incredibly disciplined about how they documented, tracked, and disseminated information. It was, think of it like a well-oiled machine, but for knowledge itself.
Okay, a knowledge machine. I like that. Give me some examples. What did that actually look like in practice?
Okay, so let's say there's a change to the spacecraft design. Didn't matter how small. Every tweak, every modification had to be documented, reviewed, and approved before they could implement it.
And I'm guessing that level of control was absolutely crucial when you had so many people working on different parts of the spacecraft, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It ensured everyone was working from, the same page, literally. That these changes weren't accidentally introducing new problems. And it wasn't just design changes either. They had a system for, capturing and analyzing all those test results, both from the ground testing and from the missions themselves.
Okay, so not just doing the tests, but actually learning from them.
Every anomaly, every deviation from expected performance, it was all documented. They wanted to understand the root cause, figure out how to prevent it from happening again.
So they turned data into actionable knowledge. They were constantly learning, constantly improving.
Exactly. They didn't shy away from failures. They embraced them as opportunities to get better.
This is all making a lot of sense, but, we are talking about the 1960s here, long before the internet, email, all the digital tools we take for granted today. So how did they manage all this information?
You're right, it was a different world. They didn't have those digital tools. It was much more hands-on, lots of paper documentation, meticulously organized, cross-referenced, and they loved visual aids. Charts, graphs, diagrams, anything to make that complex information easier to understand.
Okay, so a more analog system, but no less effective. It must have been an incredible amount of work to keep all that information flowing.
Oh, it was. But it was also about the people.
Right, the human element.
Yeah.
Tell me about the people who were, the ones making sure the knowledge machine was running smoothly.
It was really a team effort. They had dedicated teams for documentation, configuration management, data analysis, all that. But it went beyond these, specialized teams.
Okay, so it was more than just assigning tasks. It was about creating a culture.
Exactly, a culture of information sharing, open communication. They encouraged everyone, from engineers to technicians, even support staff, to, share their observations, insights, ideas.
Because the best ideas can come from anywhere, right?
Exactly. They created an environment where everyone felt comfortable speaking up, sharing their knowledge. And that was incredibly powerful.
Did they have, specific ways of capturing and sharing that collective knowledge?
Oh, yeah. Lots of meetings, both formal and informal. Just to share experiences, discuss challenges, brainstorm solutions. They used written reports, technical memos, sometimes even informal newsletters to spread the word.
So they really emphasized both formal and informal channels. They understood that that knowledge sharing was essential for success.
It was. And they didn't limit this knowledge sharing just to within NASA. They collaborated with contractors, universities, even international partners. They saw the bigger picture, that everyone was part of this massive team working towards a common goal.
Okay, so you've talked about the engineering, the testing, the people, and now this idea of knowledge management. And I'm seeing how all these elements are interconnected, how they all played a part in the success of Apollo. It's a powerful story, really.
It is a testament to human ingenuity, determination, collaboration, and also a reminder that we can achieve incredible things when we work together, when we learn from our mistakes, and when we share our knowledge freely.
Exactly. And I think that's a great place to end our deep dive. Remember, we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, so many fascinating stories, challenges, and triumphs. So I encourage you, go out there, dig deeper into the Apollo program. And as you learn more, as you discover those hidden gems, think about the lessons we can apply to our own lives, to our own challenges. What can we learn from Apollo's success? How can we foster that same spirit of innovation, collaboration, and that disciplined pursuit of excellence in everything we do? That's something worth thinking about.
It is.
So until next time, keep exploring.